Well, we got some good and bad news. The bad news is that for healers and tanks, it looks a bit set in stone with Vengeance Demon Hunters and Discipline Priests being the creme de la creme for these roles. And even for DPS, specs like Balanced Druids, Fire Mages, and Unholy Death Knights are becoming favorites for top picks in the high-end Mythic Plus scene. However, the good news is that most specs are performing strongly in high keys. In fact, there's very few specs that feel underwhelming, with only one spec making it into D tier, and most specs coming out on A tier. So while this M+ tier list represents what's being played on the top end, bear in mind most specs listed here will be excellent in high keys, just maybe not if you're pushing the highest keys in the world. We're guessing some of you probably hated the meta during Season 1, where 4 out of 5 spots were already set in stone for Mythic Plus. But are things any better now? And if you are serious about climbing this season, which let's face it, you probably are since you're watching this video, then you are the perfect person to try out our revolutionary add-on that has already helped thousands of players rank up in this season alone. With just the click of one button, we can give you a fully configured interface with every single setting already fine-tuned, including features you didn't even know you needed. Our add-on instantly gives you all of the essentials, including weak auras, nameplate profiles, and even custom settings aimed at giving you maximum performance in your next key. Even better, everything is custom-made to fit your class and spec, and even includes 2-in-1 support for PvP, allowing you to hot swap UIs with a single mouse click. This is just one amazing perk available only to Skill Cap members, who also get instant access to Season 2 courses on our website. You will learn tips and tricks for each dungeon, allowing you to be the smartest player in your group. Everything we offer is backed up by a rank up guarantee. That's right, we literally promise results as long as you use our service, or you get your money back, no questions asked. All you need to do to sign up is visit the exclusive discount link below. For now, back to the video. For this tier list, we will be separating each role, starting with tanks. As we mentioned earlier, Vengeance Demon Hunters are the top dogs in this category. Their control kit is insane, containing AoE silence, stuns, and grips, which allows Demon Hunters to have powerful AoE mob control. Vengeance is also one of the best tanks at surviving by themselves, having plenty of defensives and self-sustain to stay alive. They also bring the Chaos brand debuff, giving magic damage users extra pressure, being a welcome sight in this meta. The only downside to Vengeance Demon Hunters is that aggro can sometimes slip away to high DPS. Maintaining aggro is quite buggy for Demon Hunters right now, and if your DPS are too hungry to not press a global 0.1 seconds into a pull, odds are they can die. This can be more of an issue during pugs or with less experienced tanks, but it is definitely a common issue that needs to be thought about if you ever play with this spec. Just be wary of your DPS allowing the Vengeance DH a bit more time to maintain aggro. Even with that downside, they provide exactly what you want and need in a tank. So it's no surprise they belong in the S tier category, simply being too good of a tank compared to the rest. Moving on, we can discuss our A tier tanks containing several different specs. First up, we have Guardian Druids, who despite being quite tanky bears and at high-end keys, can be quite difficult to play. Having good self-tankiness, providing the Mark of the Wild buff, and having some mob control makes them great tanks overall. They usually synergize well in pure physical comps and high-end keys, buffing each other's damage to maximize everyone's DPS. Unfortunately, due to Balanced Druids being meta, it might be hard to fit a Guardian Druid in most groups. Next up, we have Blood Decays, which offer a high amount of self-healing, making a healer's job slightly easier. They can also deal tons of damage whenever they summon a Blood Beast, dealing huge pressure to any packs. While their survivability is fantastic, this only remains true if they don't get one-shot by tank busters, which can be difficult to live in high keys. Their AoE Mass Grip and Blinding Sleet is also excellent for big mob pulls, shutting them down to keep your party safe. The last tank spec to make it to A tier is none other than the Prot Warrior. It got hit with recent nerfs, but even so, it still deals high amounts of damage, especially in single target situations. Having Battle Shout, great pressure, and AoE stuns to lock down mobs with good defensives, they make for great tanks overall. A main weakness of Prot Warriors is that they don't really have high self-healing. They can mitigate damage well, but once they lose a lot of HP, they will need help to top themselves. Otherwise, it could be difficult for them to survive if they're about to take heavy pressure. All these tanks belong in the A tier category, being great candidates for your tank role in Mythic Plus. The only reason these tanks aren't up there with Vengeance Demon Hunters is because this spec is simply doing everything these tanks can do, but better. All tanks in this category can still be played at high keys, which you can see on our Raider.io rankings. Moving on to B tier, we have one tank spec here, being Protection Paladins. Having access to the baseline Paladin cooldowns is excellent for your team's survival in any Mythic Plus dungeon. On top of this, having an AoE interrupt on a short cooldown makes Prot Pallies superb at shutting down casters, preventing any unnecessary one-shots from happening. One of the major flaws with this spec is that they are squishy, struggling with survival. It seems kinda crazy that a tank spec is struggling with survival, right? Well, that's the case with Prot Paladins, needing extra help to keep them afloat with any heavy-hitting mobs. Their damage is also dependent on cooldowns, dealing really good throughput while they're up, but outside of that, their damage is on the lower end of the scale. For these reasons, this is why we put Prot Paladins in the B tier, being slightly weaker than the A tier tanks. That means that unfortunately at the bottom of the tier list for tanks, we have Brewmaster Monks. Again, this spec can still perform well in high-rated keys, having great synergy with physical damage classes due to their Mystic Touch debuff. Brewmasters are highly reliant on their Celestial Fortune to keep themselves alive. The more healing they receive, the stronger they can self-heal, so they typically get along with Resto Druids or Mistweaver Monks that have high healing throughput. Currently, the meta is mainly Disciplined Priests and their shields don't add to this, making the synergy here quite bad for the Monk. Outside of that, they can struggle picking up mobs and don't have much of a toolkit compared to the other tanks. Due to this, we have put Brewmaster Monks on the C tier. Again, they can still be played at high keys with the right compositions and with healers that have high healing throughput. We stress that this tier list is mainly due to the high-end keys, so any tank is worth considering if it's a lower key than the top end. With tanks covered, we can move on to our melee DPS, where there are plenty of strong options to choose from. However, there's one melee spec in particular that is cut above the rest. Some of you may have guessed it, but it's none other than the Unholy Death Knight. The main thing that separates this spec from the rest of the melee is its absurd AoE damage. Even if it's 2 mobs, the amount of damage an Unholy DK can deal in cleave situations is insane, dealing monstrous damage in massive AoE situations. It also has good priority damage and scales well with all mob sizes. In terms of defense, it's also pretty much unkillable in most dungeons, having access to AMS, AMZ, IBF, and Lichborn, putting its survival skills through the roof. Being a plate wearer makes them more tanky in general, and in dire scenarios, having Death Strike to heal themselves will be excellent whenever they are taking too much pressure. The only weakness of an Unholy DK is that its single target damage can be weak, often needing at least one extra mob to start dealing significant pressure. However, the massive benefits outweigh this con, which is why Unholy DK is the only S-tier melee spec for high-end keys. Its AoE damage is unparalleled, and with its strong self-survival, it makes it a cut above the other melee DPS. With Unholy DK covered, we can now move on to our other strong melee DPS in the current patch. One spec that shines here is Enhancement Shamans, having high AoE damage, crowd control, and good priority targeting, making it excellent at dealing with big pack pulls. It also brings a huge toolkit to parties, giving Bloodlust, a mastery buff, decurse, purge, and a low cooldown interrupt. The main problems with Enhancement Shaman is that its other spec, Elemental, can pretty much do all the same things while being easier to play and having stronger AoE damage due to their cooldowns. Enhancement is also quite squishy compared to other DPS, needing extra help to keep themselves alive. Another strong melee comes in the form of Assassination Rogue. It also has insane damage and very strong priority damage, making it great in any big pulls. It relies on re-stealths to get off huge pressure, which means that your party must play around it when pulling mobs. As such, you shouldn't chain pull mobs or you will nerf the Asa Rogue's damage severely, as well as making their blood pressure rise. Another con of Asa Rogues is that it struggles to survive on rot fights. This is where continuous damage applies to everyone constantly throughout an encounter. A good example of this is against Swampface in Floodgate. The boss constantly deals damage to everyone, which is where an Asa Rogue can be vulnerable. Outside of these weaknesses, Asa Rogues are excellent contenders for a DPS spot in any party. Speaking of rogues, Subtlety is also a strong option, being competitive with Assassination Rogues. The main difference is that sub-rogues have very high damage during their cooldowns, but low pressure without them. During cooldowns, they can pack a punch in single target or AoE situations. It also has less priority damage than Asa Rogues, but around the same survivability. Due to the nature of how both specs work, they can alternate in strength based on the dungeon. However, the difference will be marginal in lower keys, so knowing that both specs are great options, you can choose whichever one you'd like. Another strong melee amongst these ranks is Retribution Paladin. They have great group support due to Paladin cooldowns, which can save people on the brink of death. It also has strong damage permanently, being valuable in any situation, containing good single target and AoE damage. Having Divine Shield as a lifesaver cooldown and being a plate wearer makes them fairly tanky in every dungeon. A major downside with Ret is that it has no priority damage, dealing the same pressure to all targets, which can be difficult in high keys against certain packs. Moving on from Ret Paladins, we have another powerful melee being the Arms Warrior. Having big cleave damage is always a welcome sight in every dungeon. They also have an AoE stun, Battle Shout for physical and melee DPS, as well as being quite tanky, which are all nice bonuses. Being able to abuse Spell Reflection can also be OP against specific mobs. A big downside to Arms Warriors is that if you choose to have strong AoE pressure, then you will lack in single target damage. This can be rough in dungeons where boss damage is important, having to choose between added single target or AoE pressure. Speaking of physical damage DPS, Windwalker Monk is also a strong contender. Its damage is super strong during single target and during 5 target AoE cleaving. Having multiple defensive cooldowns on a low timer also makes their survival strong in any dungeon. They have one major downside though, being that they're target capped, unable to deal massive pressure if there are more than 5 mobs in a pull. The more cleaving targets there are, the less effective a Windwalker Monk will be with their damage output. Another melee amongst these ranks is Feral Druid, having access to great burst damage and good pressure overall in single target and cleave situations. It can be a bit squishy, but has a few decent defensives such as Bark Skin, Survival Instincts, and Renewal. The big problem is that Balanced Druid is just more OP, being the Druid spec most groups are looking for. Since it's overshadowed by the superior spec, it makes it difficult to bring a Feral Druid over them. Last of all, we have Havoc Demon Hunters, which deal excellent damage and synergize well with spell damage or casters due to their debuff. They have good priority damage and amazing DPS overall in single target and cleave situations. A big issue with Havoc Demon Hunters is that Vengeance Demon Hunters are usually the most popular role for a tank spot. That means in the current meta, it's hard for them to fit, unless they have another tank in their group. Bear in mind, this only really applies to super high keys. The best tanks Havoc Demon Hunters would usually pair up with are Blood DKs or Prot Paladins. All these melee discussed belong in A tier. They're super strong in any M+ dungeon, just falling short of Unholy DKs due to their damage output. These specs have great damage in one way or another, being able to have high survivability skills themselves or bring insane utility to help you in any key. Again, it will highly depend on your composition, especially in top-end keys, but all melee here are powerful enough to be contenders in high M+ dungeons. The rest of the melee are a bit weaker overall and are usually overshadowed by their other specs, which is why they're in B tier. This is the case with Outlaw Rogue, having no burst damage but consistent pressure throughout any fight, which can be strong in dungeons like Rookery or Theater of Pain. Outside of this, its overall damage is overshadowed by sub or Asa rogues in other dungeons, making it much more of a niche spec. There's not really any point to play Outlaw unless it's for those 2 dungeons where it can be situationally better. Frost DKs are actually quite good DPS specs, dealing great damage in single target and cleave situations. It also has excellent self-survival, but since Unholy DK is the best spec for all melee, it's no surprise that it outperforms Frost in every single way. There's just really no point in playing Frost DK over Unholy, unless you want to for your own pleasure. When it comes to Fury Warriors, they actually do big damage, especially into boss fights where their damage increases in power. This again could become a more prominent pick than Arms in keys such as Theater or Rookery. However, in other keys, Arms and other specs will usually outperform Fury since it's damage capped in AoE. It can only cleave up to 5 targets with most of its damage, making it lackluster in the other dungeons. That leaves us with the last melee spec in the game being Survival Hunters. They deal decent damage with or without cooldowns, able to blast damage in any pull. It also has the baseline Hunter defensives, as well as Feign Death being a top ability for their survival. However, just like Outlaw Rogue, it's overshadowed by its other specs in keys. Both BM and MM Hunters are stronger than Survival in every way, which means most players will play the other ranged specs. These 4 melee will belong in the B tier, finalizing this melee DPS tier list. Again, all the melee here are still viable on high keys, but the higher you get, the more difficult it will be to play outside of the meta. Most of these specs perform well, but are overshadowed by their other specs. However, in certain keys, these specs can perform quite well and may just be worth the respec depending on the group you have. Now that all the melee specs have been covered, we can move on to range DPS. Again, we emphasize that all these specs can be replaceable with other DPS, especially in lower keys, and depending on what your group needs. Starting off with the top tier range DPS, we have to put Balanced Druid here. They are simply the best at snowballing huge AoE damage with or without cooldowns, pumping big AoE packs with their pressure that's easy to spam, making them highly valuable in dungeons. Having access to Solar Beam, Typhoon, and Vortex also makes them fantastic at crowd controlling a bunch of mobs, disrupting all their casts. Providing the Druid versatility buff is also a welcome sight to everyone, especially in high keys where every ounce of bulk is needed. There's really not too much of a downside to Balanced Druid, except that their single target pressure can be lacking since they pick up big AoE pressure from their talents. With that being the only real downside, they will be heading to the S tier as a ranged DPS. No wonder most high keys take Balanced Druids, as their AoE control and damage is just so powerful. If you have access to a mass grip in your party, this has incredible synergy with their Solar Beam, locking down any casts from any mob. The only other S tier range spec that belongs here is Fire Mage. It has incredible burst damage with combustion, being excellent for killing AoE packs or even in single target scenarios. It does mean that your party should play around combustion, as you want to use it at the start of every big pull, then chaining pulls if needed to make the best use out of this powerful cooldown. Fire Mages also provides the intellect buff, time warp effect, and has decent mob control with a fairly short cooldown interrupt and an AoE knock to disrupt multiple mobs. They also have a cheat death mechanic with Cauterize, as well as other defensive cooldowns, making Fire Mage one of the best classes at surviving mechanics by themselves. The main weakness of Mage is being centered around combustion, so if your party doesn't play around it, they will become much less impactful until they get it back again. With all those pros outweighing the tiny con of a Fire Mage, it's clear why it belongs in the S tier category. They are super popular in high keys, having big pressure throughout a dungeon run and making their healers' life easier, assuming they play well with their defensive cooldowns. Moving on to our A tier specs, we'll start off with Elemental Shamans being powerful in all dungeons. Their main strength comes with the 3-minute cooldown Ascendance, decimating big AoE packs with their insane damage. They also bring Bloodlust, a mastery buff, and great utility for crowd control on AoE packs. Having a short cooldown interrupt makes them excellent at locking down casters too. However, their strength can be their downside, as the party should play around their 3-minute Ascendance, entering big pack pulls ideally when the Ele Shaman has this cooldown ready. Outside of Ascendance, their damage will be good, but not nearly as powerful, relying on procs to deal big damage. Moving on from Elemental Shaman, we have Frost Mage, which comes to no surprise given a mage's baseline toolkit is so powerful, as we explained with Fire. The biggest difference is that Icy Veins requires a bit more ramp-up time, but it can still deal an incredible amount of damage. It has great burst damage and good sustain, being powerful at dealing with single target damage. Frost is also easier to play compared to Fire, but Fire is still stronger due to combustion having more impact overall in dungeons. Marksmanship Hunters are another top-range DPS spec this season, having access to great damage within a certain threshold. It has huge burst damage and great single target pressure, making it admirable for dungeons like Theater or Rookery. Having access to Turtle, Feign Death, multiple damage reduction cooldowns, and a self-heal makes Hunters decent at surviving. If you Feign Death at the right time, you can skip mechanics or reduce massive pressure, making it a powerful defensive. That being said, it's limited with its damage throughput, as it is target capped, making it lackluster in other dungeons where mass AoE damage is preferred. Another spec that belongs here is Beast Mastery Hunters. BM is definitely up there, having good single target and AoE pressure during an entire dungeon. Again, with all the hunter utility it has to keep itself alive, it can be fairly tanky. BM is also very mobile and doesn't lose damage while moving, since it doesn't need to cast any spells. A main issue hunters have, which applies to all their specs, is that one-shot mechanics could be difficult to survive, as they're quite squishy outside of their defensive cooldowns. Moving on from BM Hunters is another spec with a lot of pets, Demo Warlocks. This class has very good sustained damage, being quite tanky overall and can perform well in AoE and single target situations. Warlocks have niche utility, including Curse of Tongues on casters, Gateway that can be used to skip pulls, and Health Stone, which is always a welcome sight to any player. It does, however, struggle to rot damage, similar to the likes of a Rogue, having limited self-sustained healing. One spec with high burst damage that can obliterate AoE packs is this Devastation Evoker. It can deal great single target pressure too, but it will have to choose between that or AoE damage, making it a bit weaker overall for dungeons. They will mostly go the AoE damage route, being favorable in nearly all dungeons. Evokers also bring Zephyr, being an excellent party defensive for the group that healers would love to help keep everyone alive. Speaking of big AoE damage dealers that come to mind, Shadow Priest is also performing well in high keys. It deals powerful AoE and prior damage, making it great during massive pulls. With access to Power Infusion, a stamina buff, and an AoE fear, it can add a lot to a party's utility in keys. It does, however, have two major downsides. The first is that Disc Priests are insanely meta at the moment, making it difficult to fit in a Shadow Priest. Second, its single target damage is super low, so the only way to capitalize on boss pressure is by pulling trash mobs with them, so the Shadow Priest can multi-dot. The last range DPS spec to make it onto the A tier list will be Arcane Mage. Once again, the mage utility for self-survival is a big thing to have in any key, as well as Decurse, Heroism, and Intellect buff. It is one of the harder specs to min-max, but in the hands of a good player, it can deal absurd damage on small packs or in single target situations. Arcane is one of the highest priority target damage dealers in the game, making it super valuable in keys like Rookery or Theater of Pain. While Arcane is strong, the issue is that Frost and Fire overshadow this spec, being superior in the other dungeons. It is also very cooldown reliant, needing Arcane Surge or Touch of the Magi to deal significant damage in any pull. With Arcane Mage covered, we can now put all of these ranged DPS specs into the A tier section. They all perform extremely well and are excellent contenders for high keys, bringing great damage and utility to the party. Fire Mage and Balance Druid just about outperform these specs, but only at the highest end of keys, so don't be shy when it comes to picking any of these A tier specs. Moving on from our A tier, we have a lone wolf in the B tier, being Destruction Warlock. Destro is essentially a weaker version of Demo Warlock, having less overall pressure with the same utility. One nice thing Destro has though is Havoc being a powerful spell for 2-target cleaving, making them superb for fighting 2 mobs at once. Destruction just doesn't really cut it compared to the other ranged DPS already listed, which is why it comes down to B tier. It's still viable enough for strong keys, but it does get overshadowed by Demonology, making it difficult to justify not speccing into it. We also have our lone C tier spec, which comes in the form of an Affliction Warlock. It's fallen off as it is overshadowed by Demo and Destro, making it the weakest spec for a Warlock to play. It has the potential to do high pressure, but similar to Shadow Priest, it takes time to ramp up and it will be much less significant in single target situations. Due to the Vile Taint talent, chain pulling mobs can make it lackluster, so you want to be careful when picking up packs with an Affliction Warlock, only chaining if they have Vile Taint ready. Outside of that, it can do great AoE in higher keys with decent priority damage too. Since it's still overshadowed by Destruction and Demonology, it will belong in the C tier. It can still perform well in higher keys, falling off in low keys due to mobs dying too quickly for them to deal any significant damage. The last spec to cover, and the only spec to make it in D tier in this entire ranking system, is Augmentation Evokers. After last season's glory run being needed in every high key, it got gutted, getting nerfed to the ground. Ebon Might no longer buffs tank or healers, which makes it a big issue in any dungeon. Shifting Sands and Clothes of Clutchmates also got nerfed significantly, making it much less powerful in Mythic Plus dungeons. They basically shifted the way Aug Evokers work, losing out on group buffs for their own personal damage, but it doesn't make up for what they lost in a big way. As such, Augmentation Evoker will be the only spec to be in the D tier, being the weakest spec in the entire Mythic Plus scene. The nerfs have been too much for Augmentation Evoker to deal with, and since they put more of an effort on its own pressure, you might as well be Devastation, being better in every way. With all the DPS specs covered, we can now move on to our last category, healers. It seems the devs have a favorite when choosing healers because Disciplined Priests are once again the best healers by far in Season 2. Oracle Disc Priest is simply super OP at the moment, giving Disc the ability to give everyone shields as big as their own HP bar. It's so powerful that some mechanics that should be hard to deal with become much more trivial. As such, they make your party incredibly tanky, unlikely to die in most fights. It does deal less damage than Void Weaver, but the exchange to make everyone live much easier is more than worth it. They also have access to Power Infusion, being super powerful in dungeons for DPS players. Soothe plus Dominant Mind can also be utilized for mob control, as well as having a stamina buff to further increase everyone's likelihood of surviving one-shot mechanics. For this reason, Disciplined Priests are the lone S-tier ranking for healers. The overpowered shields are just unrivaled when it comes to high keys, and it's part of the reason why so many teams can advance to do some of the top-end keys at the moment. Moving on to the A-tier healers, we have quite a number of specs here, starting off with Mistweaver Monks. Mistweavers have access to the highest DPS out of all healers, especially in single-target situations, making it very powerful in any group. It has strong healing output, but requires good planning with their Jade Empowerment stacks to utilize fully. If played well, they are extremely mana efficient, but if played wrong, they will need plenty of drinks to make up for extra mana consumption. A weakness of Mistweaver Monk is that it can be difficult to heal on rot fights where ancient teachings cannot keep up with the pressure. It also requires melee range to heal often, which can be a downside in unfriendly melee fights. Being with melee or physical damage dealers can be nice though, as Monk provides the Mystic Touch debuff, increasing all their pressure. Moving on from Mistweaver Monks, we have Resto Druids. Druids are unique in the fact that they can heal rot fights super well, but their burst healing is lacking. They also provide the Mark of the Wild buff to all party members, giving increased versatility, being valuable in all dungeons. While they can deal decent damage, they have to pick between DPS or healing, making it rough to deal damage in high keys where healing will be a high priority. As such, this spec is difficult to master, weaving between melee DPS and healing to min-max this spec in any key. The last healer in this tier will be Restoration Shamans. Along with their strong healing, they have a lot of utility with AoE control, a ranged interrupt, a mastery buff, and giving heroism to the party. A strength yet weakness of Shaman is that their healing rain provides a lot of healing and damage if people are in its radius. That means typically parties with full melee work well with Shaman, all being on top of the healing rain to gain additional healing. If your party moves out of this too much, then it could be tricky for the rest of Shaman to keep them alive. Another weakness is that Shamans can get very mana hungry during dungeon runs, with healing rain and other abilities costing a high amount of mana. So you'll have to play around the Shaman's mana bar, making sure you don't do any big pulls if they're low on mana, which could lead to wipes. That means these 3 healers will belong to the A tier list. All of these specs perform well and are strong at the moment, dealing a high amount of healing and adding some damage to the mobs. The only reason they aren't in S tier isn't due to their lack of strength, it's just that Discipline Priests are in a league of their own, simply being too strong. You can continue to do high keys as these A tier specs, having nice healing and utility to bring to any group. Moving on to our B tier healers, we only have one spec here, being Holy Paladin. Similar to its other specs, the baseline Paladin cooldowns is great for any dungeon. Having Freedom, Blessing of Sacrifice, Bop, and Lay on Hands can be excellent in times of need. Paladins have strong heals during cooldowns, but without them, their healing can sometimes be lacking, which can spell disaster when the group is taking big damage. Their damage is also decent, but definitely falling behind the likes of Mistweaver Monks or Disciplined Priests, as they have to choose between damage or healing. These downsides can be quite big, so we will be putting Holy Paladin on the B tier for now. Unless you're Ellesmere, Holy Paladins struggle to perform at the highest keys possible. The lack of damage and sometimes healing can make it a bit difficult for party members to react to. That being said, Holy Paladins can still hold their own in most keys, making them pretty strong overall. Moving on to the last 2 healers who both belong in C tier, being Holy Priest and Preservation of Ochre. Holy Priests also have the Oracle Hero spec, but it's not nearly as powerful for Holy compared to Disc. The healing is decent, but without the powerful shields, Holy feels much more underwhelming. You also lack Atonement healing, making it much more difficult for Holy to deal as much pressure as Disc too. That being said, you still bring the powerful party utility with Power Infusion, Soothe, Dominant Mind, and Stamina buff. Preservation of Ochre is the last healer on this tier list, and probably the least impactful healer of them all. It can deal good burst healing, but it's very cooldown reliant, and their cooldowns take too long to come back. While they can deal big damage, they have to choose between pressure and healing, making it difficult for them to keep up with in higher keys. Having limited range and limited healing output makes it difficult for Preservation of Ochres to keep people alive in high-end keys. That means both of these healers will go in the C tier. They can still do decently well in keys, but they are on the weaker side of healers compared to the others mentioned. Luckily for Holy Priests, if you aren't too stubborn about playing Disc, you can respec and become the best healer in the game. The same can't be said for Preservation of Ochres though, struggling with healing in general but can perform well in the right circumstances. And remember, if you're looking to rank up fast this season, we've got you covered with our revolutionary add-on that has already helped thousands of players this season alone. With just the click of one button, we can give you a fully configured interface with every single setting already fine-tuned, including features you didn't even know you needed. Our add-on instantly gives you all of the essentials, including weak auras, nameplate profiles, and even custom settings aimed at giving you maximum performance in your next key. Even better, everything is custom-made to fit your class and spec, and even includes 2-in-1 support for PvP, allowing you to hot swap UIs with a single mouse click. This is just one amazing perk available only to SkillCap members, who also get instant access to Season 2 courses on our website. You will learn tips and tricks for each dungeon, allowing you to be the smartest player in your group. Everything we offer is backed up by a rank up guarantee. That's right, we literally promise results as long as you use our service, or you get your money back, no questions asked. All you need to do to sign up is visit the exclusive discount link below. And that's all for this one, guys. We'll see you in the next one.